back here with everybody. It's always nice to come and to see each one of you. And I know some of you, it sounds like you're getting ready to maybe be going off to college and graduating soon. So hopefully I'll still see you from time to time. So today is Mother's Day. So I was asked to particularly look at, talk about mothers, motherhood. And I want to start off with a story, and you might be familiar with the story. About 9 years ago, there was a 6-year-old girl by the name of Jessie Hall, and she was about 9 years ago. She was taken around this time in April to Johns Hopkins University Hospital, the Children's Hospital. And she was walked in there by her mother and father, and she was there to have a surgery done because she suffered from a condition known as Rasmussen's encephalitis, which is can cause seizures, it can cause brain damage, it can cause loss of cognitive functions, and even can lead to death because it's a disease of the brain. And she was taken into that hospital to be given a particular type of treatment which involves surgery and essentially removing half of her brain. Which sounds a little drastic. To remove half of someone's brain. How can you function with half a brain? And she had the surgery completed, and now she is in high school and she lives a normal life. No seizures, no real major problems, no side effects from the surgery or anything. She's a normal kid. Plays basketball, loves school, and you would never even know that there was anything had ever been wrong with her. And what's important is not the story isn't just about her, but the person who performed that surgery on her was a man who perfected that surgery. And you're probably familiar with his name. It's Dr. Ben Carson. And he actually perfected that technique of removing half of someone's brain in order to keep these seizures and this brain disease that would lead to death, to cure that, if you will. And so the story is really about Ben Carson because he has done so many wonderful things to advance neurological surgical community and to help with all kinds of things. He's even separated conjoined twins who were born fused together, their brains fused together. So not all of them have been successful, but there have been a lot of successes as a result of Dr. Ben Carson. So he's very well known. At the young age of 33, he became the head director of neurological surgery at Johns Hopkins at the age of 33 years old. So he has a brilliant mind, very well gifted. But the thing about Ben Carson is that if you were to ask him what is behind his success, he's not going to say it was the result of study, although a lot of studying was involved with that. It wasn't the result of just hard work, although there was a lot of hard work involved in getting to that point. He would attribute almost everything and who he is today because of his mother. Because of his mother. That's who he would attribute a lot of his success to today. That's the one person he would turn to. See, Carson grew up in extreme poverty in Detroit, Michigan. I mean, he hardly had anything at all. Extreme poverty. His parents divorced when he was very young, and so he didn't know his father, but his mother dedicated her life to taking care of him and his brother. And in fact, she actually only completed the 3rd grade. She was a dropout out of school, his mother was. And she only had up to a 3rd grade education. She was illiterate, she couldn't read, she couldn't write. And she would actually clean the houses of wealthy people. That's what she did, that was her job. She was cleaning homes. And sometimes she would take Ben Carson and his brother with her to go clean these homes. And she would actually ask them, hey, do you want to live in a place like this rich like this, live very wealthy, or would you rather live where we live? And they would say, well, we'd rather live in a place like this than where we live in extreme poverty. Things like that encouraged him to want to be successful. And she would actually, his mother would actually turn off the television. She only let them watch a couple hours of TV a week. And she would take them to the library every single week, and they were required to take out 2 books from the library, read them, and do a book report on each of them and give it to her. Now, book reports that she couldn't read, but they didn't know that. And she would actually grade them too. She would take them somewhere, she'd get help marking them up, and all of this she did because she cared about her kids, not going through the same life that she did. And she never allowed them to have any excuses. If they ever had an excuse, she would say, don't you have a brain? Can't you figure it out? You could have thought your way out of that thing. And so all of this was done by Ben Carson's mother to help them to be successful. She cared so deeply about them. And there are hundreds and hundreds of stories that we could tell about mothers, right? There's lots of stories over the history of the world about the contributions to mothers to their children. So I just picked one of them, but there's multiple stories, right? So why so much emphasis on mothers? Why do we have a whole day dedicated to mothers? Well, if you think about it, it's probably because of their role, because of their influence on us, right? Because they're one of the closest people to us. For 9 months, they're the closest people to us, right? But they are close proximity, and those that are closest proximity to us typically have the most influence on our life, right? Think about who has the most influence on your life right now? Who do you think? Mother and father, right? Your parents probably have the most influence over your life right now. Maybe some of you don't want that much influence over your life right now, but it's true. And really the bottom line is, and what we're going to look at this morning, is that motherhood is actually a God-created role. It's not just a biological statement. Because a lot of us think about motherhood, we just think, well, mother, father, that's, their family, and that's it. But it's actually a role that God has created and given, is the role of motherhood. So that's what we're going to look at, the role of motherhood. So, why a sermon on motherhood from Genesis chapter 2? I know that you're all wondering, why in the world would you start, this is Genesis 2? This is supposed to be a sermon about mothers, not Genesis 2. I mean, why not honor your father and mother from Exodus 20:12? Or some other, children obey your parents from Ephesians 1 or Ephesians 6. Don't worry, we'll get there, okay? So, if you're a mother, we'll get to the obedience part for your kids. So, but why Genesis 2? Well, that's because that's where it all began. We just read from Genesis 2. That's where motherhood begins. Would you agree? Motherhood begins in Genesis 2. So what do we mean by that? Well, in Genesis 2, we actually read a very specific account of creation. You read Genesis 1, there's creation account. And then you read Genesis 2, and you're like, well, wait a second, this kind of sounds like we're repeating what we said in Genesis 1. Well, it is. It is a repeating of the creation account, but very much more specific. And remember, prior to Genesis 2, what do we read in Genesis 1, 27 through 28? You remember what God told the man and the woman to do? What they were commanded to do? You remember? Genesis 1:26 or 1:27. Look in 27, 28. It says that God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female. And he blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over the living things that move on the earth. So God commands them to go do something. Be fruitful, multiply, have children. And not only that, but he gives them a command in what we already just read in chapter 2, verse 15. He gives them another command. It says, he took the man, he put him in the garden to do what? to cultivate it, and to work it, to keep it. So, there is actually a command here. There's two commands. Be fruitful, multiply, and watch over the garden. It's to watch over the garden. And that command was not just given, it says he was given to Adam, but it was also given to Eve too. Because Adam was supposed to tell Eve, after she was created, look, this is our job description. Our job description is to take care of this garden. And to have kids. And so, that means what? If Adam was supposed to tell Eve that, hey, we're supposed to keep the garden, then what does that mean that they tell anybody else who comes along? Take care of the garden. Right. So when children come along, this is how we're supposed to take care of the garden, which in a sense was to protect the garden. You could say also to protect what God had created, particularly from talking snakes, which would come later, which we know that they weren't very successful in protecting it from talking snakes. And so he gives this to the man and the woman. He gives them these commands, teaches them to cultivate, to work the garden, to protect it, and thus motherhood begins. Because any children that come along should be told, this is what God demands of us, this is what he requires. And that's why, in fact, Adam calls Eve, because he got the name Eve. Remember, he brought the animals to God. God brought the animals to Adam to see what he would name it. And then it says he created woman, and he brought the woman to the man to see what he would name it. And he names her Eve. Why? Because chapter 3, verse 20 says, because she was the mother of all the living. So see, motherhood begins all the way back in Genesis, which means that God created that role all the way back at the beginning in the creation is where motherhood is created. And that role of a mother is created. And so, if you think about it, if that's where it was started, then that means that anything after that in all of the Bible, where we read about mothers and children's relationship to mothers, is all about how to be or specific commands on how to go about doing what God originally commanded them to do back in the garden. So that when we get to Deuteronomy 6:4-6, when God gives the law to Moses, then God says as part of that, teach all of these things to your children. So that when they lie down, they remember God's law. When they wake up, they remember God's law. Everything is about how to do what he commanded them to do in Genesis in a very specific way. So when we get to Proverbs 31, where it talks about what a good mother is, that it's one who provides food for her household, or clothes them appropriately, and so that her children rise and call her blessed. Or when we get to Titus 2:5, where it says for mothers to teach what is good and to love their children, to be self-controlled and pure and working at home. All those things are how to specifically fulfill God's command back in Genesis to watch over the earth and to teach those who also would come along how to obey God and how to live according to the way that he wants them to, or to us to. And let's face it, if you think about it, motherhood is difficult, right? I'm not a mother, but I've seen my wife, I saw my mother growing up. Motherhood is difficult. So, and we see in the Bible all kinds of examples of this, right? You can look through the entire Bible and you can see all kinds of examples of good mothers, bad mothers. It's all there. Why? Because it's difficult. And children who disobeyed their parents and led to all kinds of very difficult consequences. And so the Bible is filled with examples. And motherhood is difficult, but it's also rewarding too, right? Is motherhood rewarding? Can I see the moms? Is it rewarding? Yes? No? Yeah? Okay. Just want to make sure that before I give this point, it's rewarding. You know, if you think about all the way back to the ancient culture, motherhood was actually a very important thing. It was considered, it was highly valued in ancient culture. And so much so that if you were barren, if you had no children, it was considered a reproach upon you, or as if God had cursed you, is what the thinking was. That Doesn't mean that God cursed somebody because they didn't have children. It just means that that was so highly regarded to be a mother and to have children that if you didn't, you thought that it was a curse from God. Remember Hannah? Hannah prayed over and over for God to give a child to her because she was old and had no children. And she was joked about that she didn't have God's favor. Remember Sarah, Abraham and Sarah? Sarah had no children, even though God promised that she would have children, and didn't have any, and then finally God, at the right time, gave her a child who became the father of the nation of Israel. So all of these, so it was an important thing in ancient culture. And remember Mary. Think about Mary, the mother of Jesus. She considered herself what? What did she say of herself when she found out that she was not just pregnant with a child, but with the Son of God? She said, "Blessed am I among all women." It wasn't just because she was going to have a child who was going to be the Son of God, but it was like saying that she had the best thing of any mother. Because she was not only, it'd be like saying that, because of something that happened to you, you were the best businessman in the world, right? Because that you would be the most highly blessed of those, because it was considered, that was her role as a woman in that culture, was to have a child. And so it was bigger than even just the fact that it was the Son of God, but because of her cultural role. And so because motherhood is God created, this is the important part, so you got to listen up now, especially this side, where I see most of the youth kind of hanging out over here. Because it's a God-given role, it should be what? What do you think? Honored, followed, yeah. Because it's a God-given role. It's not just something that's out there that we created. It's something that God has created. And so, the second thing is that we're to honor your mother. Honor your mother. Now, most of you know where that comes from, right? Honor your father and mother. Exodus 20:12, which is part of the what? 10 Commandments. You're still waiting. 10 Commandments, right? 10 Commandments. So, why does it say honor and not obedience? Why do you think it says honor? Why not obedience? Why not obey your mother? Why not obey your father and mother? Why does it say honor your father and mother? Kind of makes you wonder, why does it not say obedience? So does that mean that I don't have to obey if it doesn't say obedience? It just says honor? You still have to obey? Yeah. Why? Because honor, if you think about it, honor is actually the best word, not obedience. Honor is the best word. It's the perfect word for this, because honor doesn't just mean obey, it means more than obey. It means to show high regard for someone. So when we look at it, we honor God. It's to place a high value on something. It's to place an incredible amount of worth on something. That's what it means to honor, which is a lot more than just obedience. You don't have to honor something to obey it. You don't have to, in order to follow commands given to you, you don't have to highly value it. You could be told to do something and obey it and say, I don't really care, but I have to do it. But I don't care. I don't value it. So honor is something more, because we honor God. We don't just obey God. We honor God. We honor Christ. Even the New Testament talks about honoring one another, which is not obedience necessarily. It's honoring. And so the question is, how much value do you place on your mother? How much worth? Because honor is about placing value on them. And the value that you place on something determines how you interact and how you treat someone. So in the case of a mother, how much you value your mother will determine how you treat your mother. It will determine how you treat her. Because honoring your mother means that the way you treat her is situation dependent. It depends on the situation. So what do I mean by that? That means when you're a child, that honor means obedience. But when you become an adult, what happens when you become an adult? And I know some of you are really looking forward to that day. When you become an adult, it changes, right? It changes slightly so that it doesn't mean obedience necessarily. It could mean obedience still, but honor changes. That's why 4 times in the Bible we read about what happens when somebody gets married. It says they leave and cleave. It means they leave their parents and they go and they're united with the person they're getting married with. And they start a family and they become their own family, unit that's still a part of a bigger family. But they start to do some things differently, separately from their parents. It's a different type of relationship. But if we just said obedience, then that means that once you got out of the house, you'd be done. Okay, Mom and Dad, I'm done being obedient. I don't have to worry about anything. But honor means more. Because honor lasts longer than just till you leave the house. Honor means that it changes so that when you become an adult, it means all different types of things. Honor continues. So that's why it says in Proverbs 6 that you shouldn't forsake your parents' teaching. Don't forsake your mother and father's teaching. But it does change the relationship. It could mean that when as you interact with your parents, you're still loving them, you're still honoring them, you respect them, even as you become an adult and you start making your own decisions about life, you still respect them. When they get older, the Bible talks about taking care of your parents in their old age. All of those things are the way that we then honor our parents continually, even after we get out of the home and reach adulthood. So you see how honor is actually really the best word, because it is an enduring commitment to our parents. It's an enduring relationship which respects. But when you're a child, it does mean obedience. And so children are called to obedience. So we look at Ephesians chapter 6. If you have a Bible, look there really quickly. I'll read it. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1. And Colossians is also very similar, Colossians 3:20. But Ephesians 6:1, Paul says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that you may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth." So, he's here referring back to what? What's he referring back to? The 10 Commandments. Right? In Exodus 20:12, that's what God said. He said, honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land that the Lord is giving you. So what does that mean today then? Why does Paul talk about land being living long in the land? Does that mean that he thinks you're going to have a long life if you honor your parents? You think that's what it means? Live long, if you honor your parents, if you obey them, then that means you'll have a long life? Well, what about children who don't? What about children who end up, they don't live as long? Let's say, with people who maybe obeyed their parents all the way up, and then they died when they were 30. Let's say. You say, well, maybe God's not fulfilling His promise. So what does it actually mean? Well, I think what he means is that he's using an illusion. He's going back to Exodus. And why did God give them the command? He said, you'll be able to live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Okay? Because where were they when the 10 Commandments were given to them? Where were they? Huh? In the wilderness? At the foot of a mountain? They didn't have any land, did they? But what did God promise them? He said, I'll give you a land. I'll give you land. So, he's giving them, he says he's promised to give them land, and he says that if you will live long in that land if you honor your father and mother. Why? What was the job of the parents? What did he say in Deuteronomy 6 that I talked about earlier? He said, teach your children to obey my commands. You see, it only works if the parents are teaching them God's commands. Because it goes back all the way to Deuteronomy 28, where God says, you come into the land, if you continue to obey my commands, if you do all that I tell you, then you're going to live long in this land. You're going to stay here. But if you don't, I'm going to take you out of the land, and I'm going to send you off to exile, which is what we know happened. But it only works if the parents are teaching their children God's law and God's command. The idea was that you're passing that on to the next generation so it's not about living long life. It all goes back to what God promised them. And so, it still applies today, that obedience to parents, God's going to bless you for that. And the whole point was to keep the evil out of. Do you know what the punishment was if children wouldn't obey parents? Oh, stoning. Oh, you've heard the story. Your parents have told you. They would take them before the elders, and if the elders realized that this child was just not obeying, didn't care about their parents, they'd stone them. Why? Well, it says, to purge the evil from among them. That was the whole point, so that they would live long in that land. And there are plenty of examples of not just good mothers, but also evil mothers. Mothers who taught their children evil things. Chronicles talks about one in particular. It was one of the kings. It says that his mother's name was Athaliah, the grandmother of Omar. And this particular king walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother was his counselor to do wicked. So, again, it only works, what God's talking about, only works when the parents are teaching their children to obey what God has commanded them to do. But there's plenty of good mothers too. Think about Hagar with Ishmael, who, right, when he was cast down in the desert wandering, she was taking care of her child nonetheless. Moses with his mother put him in a basket to hide him. So there's both throughout Scripture. And so, but obedience to parents is necessary as a child. And I want to give you a couple of things to think about. Because, I was a kid once. And I have a mother. And I didn't always obey my mother. Because I didn't think that, I didn't want to do what she told me to do. Or I would say, that's just not right. My mother shouldn't do that. But you know what? We have to remember that our parents, our mothers, they're not perfect. But you know what? Neither are you. Right? You're not perfect either. And God still commands obedience even when you think that what your parents are doing is not right. Even what your mother is telling you to do, you don't agree with it, God still commands obedience. And you know what? Mothers will still get it wrong sometimes. Because they're not perfect. And we have to have grace. As children, you have to have grace too. And realize that God blesses obedience. And in the end, I'll tell you that when you get older, you'll look back, and there's things, a lot of those things that you probably are like, they don't know what they're talking about, they don't know what they're doing, I don't agree with the way they did. You'll look back and you'll say, yeah, they actually did know what was best for me at the time. There'll be a lot of that. But motherhood, thirdly, is more than just your immediate family. It's more than just your immediate family. And you can be a motherly influence even in your church. So motherhood goes much beyond just the family. Because there are people who do not have mothers, but they have motherly influences in their life that act just the way mothers would and are teaching them things. Teaching there are mothers who don't have any kids, but they act like mothers to other people. Not only that, but in Titus 2-5, which, let me actually read that to you. Titus 2-5. Titus doesn't get a lot of attention. Titus 2-5 talks about older women teaching younger women to love their husbands, love their children, to be sensible, pure, workers at home, kind, subject to their own husbands, so that the word of God will not be dishonored. And so there are older women who can be influences to help younger women within the church. Because if you think about it, I said motherhood is difficult, and you all agree, motherhood is difficult. But God has given you people as mothers within the church who are experienced, who are older, who have gone through that are there to also help you and encourage you as you go through motherhood as well. So I want to encourage you with that. And I want to encourage the children, or kids too, youth, however you want to be referred to as, teenagers, that there are people, I'm sure women, other women in the church here, that act like motherly influences for you too, right? And so you need to allow them to do that, because they really have, just like your own mother, have your best interest in mind. Things like taking care of your mother-in-law, who isn't your real mother, but isn't your biological mother, but a mother-in-law. Think about Ruth. Ruth, she took care of her mother-in-law, right, after her husband died. And Jesus, he referred to his children, to people who are believers in him, as his mother and his brothers, right? Remember when he became his mother and his actual mother and his actual brothers came to him, and they said, hey, your mother and your brother are waiting outside, and Jesus, and he said, who are my mother and my brothers? Those who love me and do my commands, they are my mothers and my brothers. So I just want to conclude with this. Motherhood is challenging. And you know what? Teenagers, don't make it more difficult. But view your mother and those who have motherly influences as a gift from God, who are there to bless you and to teach you. Even if it's difficult right now, you will eventually see the blessing that God gave you in your mothers and what they did for you and everything that they've done. And I also want to encourage moms too, especially if you're discouraged. I can see discouragement. Sometimes I see that. My own wife tells me that she's discouraged. I hear other people say they're discouraged. I knew my mother was discouraged from teaching me. You get discouraged because it's difficult. And a lot of times we read Proverbs. And if you know the verse in Proverbs where he talks about train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it, right? We read that and we think, oh, that's a promise. So if I teach my children everything, then when they're older, they will not depart from it. They'll stay Christians, they will do everything Christian-like, and then sometimes they don't. What happened? What happened to the promise, God? Well, I think probably what happened is that it was never really a real promise. Because we look at Proverbs, they're general rules of thumb. Okay, it's a general principle that if you do train a child, he will stick to that as he gets older. So I want to encourage you that don't get discouraged just because your children don't always follow everything, or even follow it even after they get out of the house. Because think about this. God is often referred to as, he's often referred to as a mother to Israel, right? He was referred to as a parent to Israel. And what happened to Israel? He gave them the commands, he gave them the law, he said, this is the way you're to act, and you'll be blessed. And what did they do? They threw it all away. They didn't obey. Well, you know what? God was the perfect parent to Israel. Right? God is perfect. He was the perfect parent to Israel. And they still strayed and went off and did their own thing. So you know what? Even if you could be the most perfect mother in the entire world, your kids could still stray. Your kids could still not obey. So don't be discouraged when things don't always go necessarily the way that you'd like them to go, because eventually it will be rewarded. It will be rewarded. You'll see the reward that comes from that. And the reward is more than just what we place value on today. We see the reward as we look at our child and they cross the stage and they graduate from high school, they graduate from college, They go on, they get married, and we look and say, oh, that's when the reward is going to come. And those things are rewarding to see that. That you train your child and they grow and they advance to different stages in their life, and you can be proud of those moments, and that will be rewarded. But the true reward, the ultimate reward, will be when you get to heaven and you see a child stand before God and they realize that everything you told them about who God was absolutely true. And that's the moment in which you'll be rewarded for all that you've done. And you see that face to face. And for the children, you'll be rewarded in obeying your parents when you stand before God and realize everything that they told you was absolutely true. So I just want to encourage you each with that as you go forward, especially on this Mother's Day. Let's pray. Father, we just thank you so much for the mothers that you've put into our life. Each and every one of us has a story of someone who either was our mother or had some sort of motherly influence on us. And some of us are still able to experience day to day our mother's influence, not just as a child, but also as adults. And we just pray, Father, that you would help us to just see how blessed we are, how much you have given to us. We just pray that we would be able to think about how we can best honor our parents, to honor our mother, not only just today, but every day. And that you would help us to think of ways that we can honor them even after we're out of the home and after we've gone on. Father, I pray for those that are here that are graduating from high school this year. Father, we pray that as they go on to other things, to college and to a job, that Father, that you would keep them and that you would help them, encourage them to hold on to all that their mothers have taught them, and that they would remain faithful and true to you, Father. I ask all this in your name. Amen.
Once again, happy Mother's Day.